Hello and welcome to the Immigrant Programmers channel. In the last video, we have already seen what Alpine.js is, Alpine's advantages and disadvantages, when to use and when to avoid it, Alpine versus others like for example React, Vue, and what are the comparisons between all of them, also including the size of the frameworks, etc. We also made a few examples and I will add a link to that video down in the description below. So if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend you to go through that video as we discuss everything about Alpine from very basic to a little complex example in the end. So assuming that you already know a little bit about Alpine, in this video now we are going to make a drop down, but this time the drop down will be a little more complex as we'll play with things like xdata, x-init, xshow, @click away, and key down. I'll give you a brief summary of all of them right now. Xdata is basically the data that we initiate our component with. We pass variables, methods, etc., and they will be available inside the div. In xinit, we can basically initiate our data. We don't need to use it always. We can use it. There are some use cases when it's important to use. I'll explain it a little bit later. Xshow is basically the CSS hidden property of an element which will basically hide or show, and in this case we want to hide the drop down when we click outside or when we click on the options button again, or if we press escape. So and that is basically what click away and key down is regarding. So basically if we click away from this drop down, we want it to close, and this is a pretty basic feature that all drop downs usually have, and we'll implement this using Alpine. Also, if I press on escape or enter, I also want this to go away, and we'll also see how to do that. So let's get started with it. Check. Before getting started with the code, I just want to mention that I'm using an extension for in my Visual Studio Code, which is AlpineJS IntelliSense. And if you're using the same IDE, I would highly recommend you to install this because it would really make your life a bit easier. Now, as you can see, we have the drop down on the right hand side of my screen. However, if I click on anything, it doesn't respond because basically there's no JavaScript in here. And what we want is if we click on the options button, only then the drop down should be visible. And if we click on it again, it should go away. That I've already imported the AlpineJS CDN into my head. Now we can simply get started with the code. And as I explained you in the last video as well, but I'll explain again for those who are seeing this video for the first time. In xdata, we basically have the data that we initialize our component with. In this case, the component would be this div. In this div, we have all the code. So basically any variable, any function, etc. that I'll declare here would be available to the whole div and all the child elements of this div. We want to see if the drop down is open or not. So I'll create a variable called isOpen and I'll give it a value of false. Now what we want is whenever this variable is true, the drop down should open. Whenever it's false, so it should not open. And let's see if it changes anything. Would you like to take a guess? It doesn't change anything because yes, this div has the value is open as false, but this value is not linked with the drop down over here. So let's do that in the next step. So now we basically want to hide this drop down when we start. So let's see if I add a class hidden in the div that basically has the whole menu, and let's see what happens. If I click on save and refresh this page, this is hidden by default, but now we can't bring it back because again there's no JavaScript yet. What we want is that we want to make this object hidden whenever this variable we declared over here is open is false, and we want it to display whenever it is true. Now there are two ways. Either we can add conditional classes, which we'll see later in the future videos or maybe in the end of this video, but there's also another way in which we can simply enable or disable the hidden property, which is called xshow, and the IntelliSense is helping me a lot here to finish up. And we'll say that this xshow should have the value of the variable I pass in it, which is in our case is open. So let's see what happens now. It is the drop down is hidden, and if you're wondering if it is still like the old code, I'll just remove it and let's see the behavior now. You see the drop down is here. Basically when we add xshow is open, it hides, And what if we initiate our x open with value true? Now it should open by default. So if I refresh the page, you see the dropdown is open. So it is pretty clear that the hiding of this dropdown is now dependent on this variable, and we have seen both the examples when it was true and when it was false. Now let's see how we can change this variable on click of the button. With Alpine, there are numerous ways to achieve that, but for now we'll go with the simplest one. We want that on the click of this button, the value of is open should become true, and we will initialize this with false. And let's see. So it is hidden right now. If we click on this button, voila, the drop down is open. But we are kind of stuck now because I'm clicking it again and again and it's never hiding. So what we want is, instead of marking it as true, we want to mark it as the opposite of is open, which basically means if it is true, it will negate the true and become false. If it's false, vice versa. Let's see if I refresh the page now. Right now it's hidden. I click here, it is visible now, and if I click again, it is hidden. So we have basically achieved what we wanted to do. Now we'll go in a little bit more depth and we'll see how we can close this drop down even on clicking somewhere else on the screen, because right now if I basically remove my focus from the button or from the drop down, nothing happens. We still see it, and this is a pretty strange behavior for drop downs in 2020. Also, we also want to say that if I click on the escape button, we want the drop down to be hidden. Let's see how we can do that. The events we just talked about, I just want to show you another cool property of Alpine, which is x-init, which basically initializes our component after the DOM has been initialized. And here we can pass values of variable. Let's say we say is open is equals true. Now on x data, we say the value of is open variable is false. However, in the init, we say that it's true. What do you think is going to happen now? If we refresh, we see the drop down. Let's say we mark it as true and we mark this one as false. What do you think, which value is the is open variable going to take? It is going to take the value given in x-init. So what's happening behind the scenes is, when we initialize our component, we say that is open have a value of true. However, x-init runs after x data because it basically runs when the DOM has been initialized. So the final value that we see when the DOM has been initialized is the value of is open as false, and because of that we don't see the drop down. And this is a pretty cool thing when we have more complex applications where we are waiting for some API call to finish and then we want to render some data. X-init is really handy when it comes to those situations, because we can also pass callbacks into this x-init, which basically runs whenever our data has been processed, and that can be very helpful in some scenarios. It's beyond the scope of this video right now. I will create a more complex video in which we'll actually get something from the API and then we'll render it on the screen, but that is a part for a future video, not for now. Now let's see how to hide this drop down when we click somewhere else on the screen. So basically when the focus is somewhere else. For that we can use the same at click, but this time we can use the away property. So whenever we click away from this drop down, from the div which basically has the drop down in this case, we want to say that is open equals false. Now let's see, if I refresh my page, I open the drop down and I click somewhere else on the screen and voila, it goes away. So we now are basically using the property of at click. We are using the click property and we are using the away event. There are also many other events. For example, if I show you with my VSCode, there's debounce, which is basically for delaying the event. There's document, once, prevent, stop, etc. We will see all of them but in future videos. For now, you know that all of them are available, and you are free and feel free to check the documentation of Alpine, which I'll also link down in the description. So feel free to go through it. You will learn a lot on your own as well. However, in my videos, I will try to cover as much as I can. Now, last but not the least, we also wanted to close this drop down whenever we click on the escape button. So let's go ahead and implement that. For that, we'll use the key down property, and the key we want to trigger the event on is the escape key. And we want to say that whenever this key is pressed, the value of is open should again be assigned to false. Now let's refresh. I open the drop down, I press my escape key, and it did not close because I had a typo. Now let's see again. I refresh, I click the escape key, and voila, it closed. So we have seen everything we promised at the starting of this video. We have seen the key down events, we have handled @click, @click.away, and we have also seen how the xdata and x-init works in Alpine. So thank you for sticking around till the end of this video. For you, I have a special bonus in which we'll see the debounce property of the click event. So debounce, I'll use the 750 for now. Debounce basically means that we want to delay the event by 750 milliseconds. In this case, we can pass other values as well. Let's say we want to debounce or delay this event by 3 seconds. Now what will happen is that this event will be triggered, but the action on the triggering of this event will be delayed by 3 seconds. So that basically means that our drop down will open after 3 seconds of clicking the button given here. Let's try it out. If I click the options button, as you clearly saw, there was a delay. And this debounce is very useful when we want transitions or animations, etc. For now, our use case is not requiring any debounce or any kind of delay, so I'll remove it. But now you know that there's another cool property that you can use with AlpineJS. In the end, I just want to say thank you for your time for watching this video. Also, please hit the like button if you like the video, and leave down a comment below of how we can improve or which other examples would you like us to cover in Alpine or any other library. We would be glad to hear from you. Also, hit the subscribe button while you're at it, and thank you once again and have a great day.